to Children's Chapel. My name is Amanda Esco, and I'm the director of the Religious Education Program for the First Unitarian Church. I am so glad you are all here with me today. It is a beautiful May afternoon. There's not a cloud in the sky. I hear the birds chirping, and look, the flowers have bloomed in my yard. I'm going to tell you a story a little bit later about this flower in particular. Before we begin today, I want us to start by lighting our chalice. We start all of our worship services with a chalice lighting. If you have a chalice at home, and I sure hope you do, why don't you go run and get it right now and we can light our chalices together. I'm going to say the words that we say in the sanctuary. So get ready. Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. This week in RE, we have been talking about memory, what we remember, what our favorite games used to be and what they are now, what our favorite books used to be, and our memories together as a family. Today, we're going to talk about memory and a holiday that's coming up next Monday called Memorial Day. We're also going to talk about a poem by E. Cummings, who was our Unitarian Universalist of the Week. So I'm so glad everybody's here. Let's start this afternoon, though, by talking about our joys and concerns. Each week we do this. It is so important that we are sharing what is going well in our lives and what might not be, what we need help with. I'll start. So my joy this week is that my puppy Dexter, I don't know if you guys have been following along with the story about my dog, but he hurt his foot a couple weeks ago and it is doing significantly better, and I am so glad about that. I also get to see my sister tonight, who I haven't seen in a couple weeks. She's gonna come and we're both gonna sit outside on the front lawn and talk to each other. So I'm excited about that too. Now, I wanna hear from you. While we may not be able to be next to each other, you can still share the things that are going well and the things that maybe aren't. You can find somebody in your house to share these with. It can be your mom, it can be your dad, it can be your grandparent, it could be your sister or your brother or your dog or your cat. Last week I left off cats and there were some people who were sad because they talked to their cats. So this week, if you have a cat, talk to it. You go and share your joys and concerns right now, and I'll wait right here. Thank you for sharing your joys and concerns with those that love you. Especially right now, it's important to keep talking about how we're feeling. I like to do that all the time. Feelings are important. This week, our UU of the week is E. Cummings. He was an incredible poet and Unitarian. I'm gonna let Lissa talk about E. Cummings, but just know that he is one of my favorite poets. Thanks, Lissa.
Hi, I'm Lissa Lander, the Religious Education Assistant at the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. Thank you so much for joining me to learn about the UU of the Week. Once upon a time in, not Boston, but Cambridge, another city in Massachusetts, Edward Estlin Cummings was born in the year 1894. He lived until 1962. He went by his middle name, Estlin, but later he professionally became known as E. Cummings and was one of the most important American poets of the 20th century. He wrote modernist free-form poetry and experimented with spacing, punctuation, and capitalization. Some of his poems were seemingly just random letters and punctuation, but they did say real things. Here is one example about a cat, but I'm not going to try to read it. After that poem, you might be thinking that you can stop learning the rules to punctuation right now. But to that I say, you have to learn the rules first before you can break them. E. Cummings was also a painter, essayist, author, and playwright. And he was a Unitarian. His father, Edward Cummings, was a Unitarian minister at the South Congregational Church in Boston. Cummings wrote about his relationship with God often. He identified most with the Transcendentalists because he saw God in nature. One poem I'd like to share with you is called "Love is the Every Only God." Who spoke this earth so glad and big? Even a thing all small and sad. Man may his mighty fortress dig, for love beginning means return. Seas who could sing so deep and strong, one querying wave will whitely yearn. From each last shore and home come young, so truly, perfectly the skies, by merciful love whispered were, completes its brightness with your eyes, any illimitable star. Cummings decided that he wanted to be a poet when he was only 8 years old. He wrote every day. And then he went to Harvard and finally accomplished his goal. E. Cummings wrote nearly 3,000 poems. He published books of collected works and dabbled in many other art forms, but none were as successful as his poetry. E. Cummings' father died tragically, and he wrote about his grief in poetry. Grief is the name we've given to the emotions we feel after losing someone or something important to us. But grief can feel a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes angry. Sometimes you can even feel happy when you remember a special person you have lost. This weekend, we will celebrate Memorial Day. This day is meant to recognize members of our military who have died. But on this day, we also like to remember our loved ones who have passed away. The last poem I want to share by E. Cummings is called "I Carry Your Heart with Me." What do you think it means?
I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear. And whatever is done by me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true. And it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you. Here is the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root, and the bud of the bud, and the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than soul can hope or mind can hide. And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart.
Thank you, Lissa, for sharing with us about E. Cummings and his life. I love his poetry. If you get the chance, I'd encourage you, with the help of your grown-up if you need it, to go and look at some of his poems. He was incredibly creative. If we think back to our Creativity Week and how he used space, punctuation, capitalization, and the lack of capitalization. He used language in new ways, and that's one of the ways that we remember him as a poet. Speaking of remembering things, this week we have been talking about memory. One way that we use our memory is to remember a person or people that have died. Sometimes this is called a memorial. Next Monday in the United States, it is Memorial Day. Memorial Day is the day that, and some of you may already know this, but it's the day that we remember people that have died in a war or in our armed services. It's different than Veterans Day, because on Veterans Day, we honor all people who have served in our armed forces. As Unitarian Universalists, we are always advocating for peace and justice in our world. Although we want peace and justice, and we want and to encourage our country to make smart choices to further peace everywhere, we can still remember and honor those people who have died while serving our country. Have you ever seen this flower? This flower blooms in my yard every May, and I love it. It's called a poppy. The seeds of a poppy flower are special. They are teeny, 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 tiny, and they are spread by the wind. They get into the soil everywhere, and they lay dormant for years. They'll keep laying there unless the ground is disturbed, and then they'll germinate and start growing. This is what happened after World War I in Europe. In the years after the war, after the ground had been disturbed by the fighting, the poppies began to grow in the late spring. In 1915, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae wrote a poem called In Flanders Field. The poem describes these fields of poppies growing from the destruction of war. American professor and humanitarian Moena Michael read this poem and it struck her to her core. As we saw with E. Cummings' poetry tends to do that to people. Moena decided to take the image of this poppy to encourage others, especially people in government, to remember those that have served in our armed forces. She started a letter writing campaign. She was selling poppies and making silk flowers, those poppy pins. People used to wear pins on their collar like this. Today, the poppy is seen as a flower of remembrance for people in the armed services that have died, thanks to the work of Moena Michael. Her efforts were important because they changed the way we as a country remembered those that died in war and our responsibility to those veterans that return home. We still have a lot of work to do to create a world where our veterans are honored. It is up to each of us to encourage those in our country's government to help create programs and systems to help support veterans that come home that have served in our country. By following Moena's example, we are prioritizing those who need help in our community. What do you think we can do as a community to help support veterans or remember those we have lost? If you have a good idea, send it to me and we can start working on it together. Even though we are physically distant from one another, we can still do good work in the world. It's just gonna look a little bit different. Thank you for joining us for Children's Chapel today. I'm so glad we're all here. To find out more about the First Unitarian Church's work in the world, please visit us at slcuu.org. That'll be all for today. Let's heart out.